Hello Internet, welcome back to From to Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the digital abyss, about books, movies, music that I find interesting, that I enjoy, or a combination of the two. You might have noticed, if you follow my channel, that it's been a little bit longer between videos this time. That is because I decided I was going to do a video about this book, Pink Pilled, by Lois Shearing. Lois? I guess Lois. This person uses they, them pronouns. I'm going to try to follow that through the video, but it's written by a single individual. And I really wanted to talk about this book. I finished reading it a couple of weeks ago, but I wanted it to be like coherent and generous, but critical, like give it a proper review. And I wanted to like plan it out, and I put so much pressure on myself that I just kept procrastinating it. And so paradoxically, I'm going to go totally off the cuff, try and edit it together into something coherent. So this video is not going to be what I hoped. It's going to be just me giving some thoughts about the book. But I'm sure that's fine. You know, me and my 12 fans are at peace with the fact that I'm never getting monetized over here. Okay, so Pink Pilled is ostensibly a book about women and the far right. I'm going to say right up front that in reality, it's more a book about women and the far right on the internet. Now, Lois Shearing is a person who appears to be very online, and they acknowledge the fact that they, over quite a long time, have gone down a lot of rabbit holes on the internet, almost like a self-harming thing, maybe looking at like homophobic material, far right material. And I can relate to this to a certain degree. I was fascinated by the alt-right in the years before they became a mainstream political phenomenon. Now it's kind of painful to like read that stuff, but back then it was like almost compelling or like fascinating to see kind of far right perspectives and the way that they were altering or changing or kind of repositioning themselves. I used to find it really interesting. I used to joke that my own search results would be mostly like Taylor Swift and fascism if anybody was watching me from the sky in the satellites. And I guess I kind of relate to Lois Shearing for this. So they have seen the development of online discourse and seen particularly perhaps influencers, people online who take various kinds of far right position and argue for an ideology which is directly anti-feminist, which is directly harmful to them. Some of them maybe as grifters for money, like some of the kind of trad wife influencers. If you don't know trad wives, they're people who kind of online sell this very romanticized, rustic, old-fashioned idea of femininity, or other people like I'm not sure if she mentions Blair White, but Blair White's an example. Lauren Southern is another. Women who've developed a big profile on the internet selling far right ideas. So I will say that Shearing is easy to read. They are obviously very enthusiastic and interested in their subject, and they are passionate about it. I think maybe I expected something that I didn't get from this book. I expected that it would explain to me the draw or the appeal of the far right to the contemporary woman, and especially perhaps the contemporary white woman. But what this book did more was went very broadly out and kind of just described or talked about a lot of different permutations of far right women online, from the things I've already mentioned to younger girls and to the TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminist movement on the internet, and kind of just covered a lot of areas of contemporary discourse where women are active in promoting radically right wing or conservative ideas. What it never really did was go into the kind of psychology or the political, sociological draw that this position has on women. And here I think is one of the things that is a weakness of this book, is that Shearing obviously has a very clear kind of anti-fascist, post-colonial, post-Tumblr worldview, which they throw out, like they'll throw out things that to the kind of mainstream reader might seem quite radical as ideas about like fascism as a guiding principle within capitalism, things like this. So they have a very firm political identity that I think means that they can never quite empathize or cede ground to the people that they are describing, because they always have to couch it within a critique. Another issue of the book is that Shearing is non-binary, known for writing about bisexuality, obviously queer, is not safe in right-wing environments, and therefore has basically done the entire book based on other people's writing or their own observation of online discourse, telegram groups, closed groups, and so forth. So there's very little like on the ground, which I guess I was always waiting for it to get to the point of what is life like for a woman in a far right movement. And there was kind of a cursory mention of this. Equally, at the beginning, there's a cursory mention of historical far right women. So there's a little summary about Savitri Devi, who, if you don't know her, she was a kind of right wing Hindu convert mystic from the UK who was very close to Adolf Hitler and who travelled around kind of selling a sort of mystic fascist ideology throughout the 20th century. I know of her because the neo-folk band Current 93 wrote music about her, and she's kind of a figure within neo-folk. Who I didn't know about was Elizabeth Tyler, the propagandist for the Ku Klux Klan. That was very interesting. Again, a little bit short, maybe. There's also a little description of Marina Le Pen. But I found this weird because since this is actually a book about kind of female propagandists for the far right more than it is about female activists, I was really wondering where Leni Riefenstahl was. Leni Riefenstahl is not mentioned, but she's probably the person who's most adjacent to, for example, Lauren Southern. And that kind of brings me to what I think is the issue of this book, is that I feel like Shearing never quite found the through line or the argumentation of this book. And I think this would be less problematic if this book had come out when they were writing it or around that time, because this is clearly written in the period before the second Trump administration, kind of in the immediate aftermath of COVID, when things like tradwives were still quite niche and weren't being covered by mainstream newspapers. And in the interim, Naomi Klein has published her book Doppelganger, which is about right-wing echo chambers online and how things like wellness and influencers have kind of been hijacked by right-wing conspiracists, which overlaps to a degree with what Shearing is trying to understand in this book. But Naomi Klein, and it's very unfair to compare anybody to Naomi Klein because Naomi Klein is truly brilliant, but she has such fascinating, complex, and empathic critique and argumentation through her book that is somewhat lacking in this book. So what I will say is, it's worth reading this book because the subject matter is fascinating and Shearing's enthusiasm and interest for the material shines through. However, if you already listen to podcasts like I listen to, like Matt Bernstein's A Bit Fruity, I've mentioned before, I really like. That's about online culture and especially the drift to the right. If you know channels on YouTube like Dead Domain, for example, you probably already have heard about a lot of this. One thing I hadn't heard of that I found fascinating, which is unfortunately only, like many things in the book, only kind of mentioned to a cursory degree, is these skull scarf or skull face e-girls who are like young girls who pose online kind of done up like emo gamers, kind of slightly anime influence, who have this skull mask over the bottom of their, or skull scarf, a kind of snood over the bottom of their face, which is part of the skull from some kind of paramilitary Nazi organization. And it's like an online niche of selfie photography with these teenage girls kind of posing in a suggestive fashion, dressed with this Nazi referencing memorabilia. I've never heard of that. That's the kind of thing that I find really fascinating. I wish that there had been more about it in the book. But one thing that was mentioned briefly that I found interesting that Shearing mentioned was that, you know, in the 90s and early 2000s, if a girl wanted to be kind of alternative, a little bit like Hot Topic, gothic, emo, there were a lot of kind of exotic things that people used to use, like dreadlocks, like henna, like bindis. And all of these things now have been kind of labeled as cultural appropriation. And you will get dragged online as a white person for using these things that are considered to be, you know, should be limited to the cultural and ethnic demographic that they're associated with. And what's left to like a white alternative girl is things like maybe the tarot, which is quite neutral, but then like maybe like runes or like Norse mythology, or a lot of things that overlap with white supremacist mysticism precisely because they are linked to European cultural heritage. And I think that is something that somebody, maybe not Shearing, maybe not me, somebody should explore in a little more detail, how the whole discourse around cultural appropriation pushes white people into this European heritage, European culture space of like symbols that are linked to like heathenry, which is also, especially online, has a degree of overlap with something like neo-folk, which has associations to fascism and the far right. Really interesting. I wish there was more about it in the book. Okay, so finally I will say this book looks beautiful. It's an easy read covering quite a difficult topic. If you're going to read it, you will need to have tolerance for the fact that it's very online and it has some pretty hot takes because not everything is really explained in detail, and it's situated within this kind of left-wing ideology. So at one point, it's written that somebody says that, for example, trans-exclusionary radical feminists are actually male supremacists. Now, I agree that trans-exclusionary radical feminism turfs, that it is a form of fascism, and that it at least overlaps to a great degree with online fascism, and there's statistics on that in the book. Male supremacist, that's difficult. If you're going to make a claim like that, you really need to explain it in detail, and there are moments like that, so you will need to have tolerance for all of this. But at the same time, if you were looking for like a primer for both the online right in general and also the kind of position of women within conservative culture today, you could do worse than to read this book. So that is my little review of Pink Pilled. Have you read it? If you read it, did you find it interesting? If you have not read it, would you read it? Have you read any of Lois Shearing's other stuff, like their book about bisexuality, for example? And if not, hit me up in the comments about this topic in general, or anything else you would like to hear me do a video on. Thanks for listening. Take care. Hope to see you soon.